Why did they keep refusing her, even when she had outshot every man in the room? Laura Foster sat in the briefing hall months earlier, a single folder in front of her. Inside were the rejection letters, 3 of them, identical in their clipped language. The Navy's words were burned into her memory. Female candidates do not meet the physical requirements for SEAL operations. Each one a carbon copy, the ink cold, the tone bureaucratic. Each one a door slammed shut. She had trained harder than anyone she knew, driven herself past exhaustion, past the point of reason, because she believed competence would be undeniable. That if she stacked enough proof in front of them, perfect scores, perfect records, perfect deployments, the system would bend. But the men in the polished uniforms never even looked at her hands, her calluses, her scars. They looked at her gender, then stamped. But what no one in that room saw, what no one could measure with charts and physiology graphs, was the silence inside Laura after each rejection. Not the silence of defeat, but of something more dangerous, the silence of someone waiting. Months later, that silence was broken not by her, but by the sound of alarms. It was supposed to be another day of training at Fort. She was out on Range 47, the morning sun washing over the red dirt as her rangers adjusted their rifles. Wind flags snapped lazily in the distance. It felt ordinary, routine. And then the sound split the air, a wailing alarm that every soldier knew but prayed never to hear. Laura froze for half a second. Her eyes lifted to the horizon, catching the faint echo of gunfire rolling across the compound. Not blanks, not an exercise. Real gunfire, fast, chaotic. She smelled it before she saw it, the bitter metallic tang drifting on the breeze. "Ma'am," one of the rangers looked at her, fear widening his eyes. "Secure the weapons, get down. Stay low," she ordered, her voice sharp, cutting through their panic. She slung her own rifle, heart already accelerating into combat rhythm. Somewhere deep inside, part of her whispered, "So this is it." Sirens bled into shouted orders over the loudspeaker. "All personnel, hostile attack confirmed. Seek cover. Await instructions." But she didn't move toward cover. She moved toward the sound. Her boots crunched over gravel as she ran, low and fast, toward the range tower. Every instinct drilled into her screamed about angles, fields of fire, cover lines. She thought of the rejection letters, how they had told her she wasn't built for this. Yet her legs carried her like steel springs, her lungs pulling air with practiced rhythm. She rounded the corner and nearly collided with Sergeant Major. His face was taut, eyes locked not on her but on the chaos unfolding beyond the buildings. He didn't waste time on questions. "Foster, rifle tower, now." He shoved a .50 cal into her arms. The weapon felt like an extension of her bones. For one heartbeat she hesitated, not from fear but from the weight of what it meant. They had her training, her the chance to stand beside them, and now in the fire of crisis they were calling for her, not out of respect, out of desperation. She climbed the tower, each step vibrating with the thud of distant explosions. From the top platform the world opened before her, fort in ruins. Plumes of smoke coiled upward where buildings burned. Soldiers darted like hunted animals across open ground. Somewhere, faintly, came the crack of insurgent rifles, sharp, deliberate. Through her scope she saw them, not shadows, not training silhouettes. Real insurgents, their faces set with grim resolve, moving with lethal precision. How had they even breached? Civilians in disguise, maybe. Contractors. She'd read enough intel reports to know how these groups planned. Months of patience for minutes of terror. Her radio crackled. Colonel Davis's voice came through, clipped but strained. "Foster, 15 confirmed hostiles. NATO officials pinned in the command bunker. All snipers unavailable. You are it." The last line between chaos and collapse. She adjusted the bipod, steadied the rifle, and scanned the first target. A rooftop gunman, 847 meters out, rifle poised toward the evacuation route. Easy shot on paper, but nothing about this was easy. She slowed her breathing. Inhale, exhale, half a breath. Hold, she squeezed. The recoil jolted her shoulder, the rifle thundering like a cannon. A heartbeat later, the insurgent toppled, lifeless. Her earpiece buzzed, target one down. Laura didn't answer. Her focus tunneled to the next window, the next shadow. Each trigger pull was a promise. Each hit a quiet defiance, spoken not with words but with action. But behind every calculation, every squeeze, the memory of those rejection letters lingered. The men in pressed uniforms had told her she wasn't strong enough, resilient enough, capable enough. And yet here she was, 15 hostiles standing between survival and massacre, and only her finger, her breath, her stillness holding the line. Stillness but not peace, because beneath the calm precision something tore inside her, not fear of dying, not fear of missing, fear of being right, fear of proving that everything she'd been told was a lie and that it had cost years of her life waiting for permission to do what she could have done all along. Her second shot cracked, then a third. The clock ticked forward. And still, a question lingered in the smoke-filled air, unanswered, gnawing at her like the whisper of the rejection letters themselves. If she succeeded today, what would they say then? How many lives hung on her next breath? Laura didn't know the number, not exactly. She only knew that behind the walls of the command bunker, NATO officers and America's finest minds sat trapped. Beyond them, young soldiers scattered across the training complex, pinned under fire they couldn't answer. The insurgents had studied the base too well, every field of fire, every blind spot. And now they were hunting, one corridor at a time. But what the attackers didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that a woman they had dismissed, ignored, underestimated, had climbed into the range tower with a weapon they thought too heavy, too punishing, too technical for her. Laura's cheek rested against the cold metal of the stock, her eyes locked through the scope. The second insurgent revealed himself, rifle jutting from a logistics building window, sight trained on the helicopter pad. Wind tugged at the flag near him, 8 inches to the left. At this distance, a bullet could drift into a medic, into a wounded ranger being loaded onto a stretcher. She adjusted, exhaled, fired. A flash, a delay, then the figure slumped forward. The window was empty. 2 down, she murmured, not for the radio, not for anyone, just to herself. A ritual, a way of marking the weight she carried. But as she shifted, scanning for the third target, a voice clawed into her memory. "We're not being discriminatory," Commander Hayes had said, her tone clipped but almost kind. "We're being realistic about human biology. Women don't have the physiological resilience for this kind of work." Resilience, the word echoed. Was this resilience? Sitting alone in a tower, heart pounding, breath measured, fingers steady, as 15 lives took form in her scope. The third insurgent darted across open ground. He was fast, disciplined, moving low between cover. At over 1,000 meters, she had barely a 3-second window. Laura tracked him, calculating his speed, wind drift, bullet travel time. Her crosshairs met him in the space where he would be, not where he was. She squeezed. A puff of dust, a pause, the figure stumbled mid-stride, then fell. Her radio crackled with distant cheers, muffled by static. "He's down. God, he's down." Laura didn't celebrate. Her mind was already moving, searching for the next shadow. Because the hardest part wasn't hitting the targets. It was ignoring the voice inside that whispered, "What if you miss? What if the letter was right? What if biology, bones, muscles, all of it fails you when it matters most?" She pushed the thought away. She had learned long ago that fear could sit beside her, as long as it didn't touch the trigger. Time bled forward, seconds drawn out into eternities. Each shot carried weight, not just of a life ended, but of lives preserved. Target 4 was half concealed. Target 5, at the limits of this range, forced her to trust her math more than her eyes. With each squeeze, she felt something inside her fracture, not from pressure, but from vindication. Every miss they predicted, Every failure they assumed dissolved in the smoke trail of another perfect strike. By her eighth target, the battlefield had shifted. The insurgents knew now. They weren't hunting helpless soldiers anymore, they were being hunted. Their movements changed, sharper, paranoid, desperate. They hugged shadows, hesitated at windows, second-guessed their positions. And with every choice they made in fear, Laura was already waiting. 8 confirmed, her radio breathed. Colonel Davis's voice broke through. There was awe there, but also something else, a weight, as if even he hadn't believed until now. Laura wiped a bead of sweat from her temple, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline roaring in her veins. Her hands didn't shake. Her shoulders didn't ache from the rifle's punishing recoil. If anything, she felt more alive, more present than she had in years. But then a pause. Target 9 was different. The insurgent had burrowed into a basement window, exposing only inches of himself at impossible angles. The gap was barely wider than a soda can. A miss by a fraction, and the bullet would ricochet uselessly. Laura stared at the opening, the scope magnifying a world that had shrunk to geometry. A sliver of shadow, a gust of wind, a downward slope of bullet trajectory. She didn't rush. She didn't blink. She let the battlefield fall away until all that existed was that narrow square of possibility. When the insurgent shifted, the tiniest movement, she fired. The bullet threaded the space as if it had always been destined to. The body jerked back, gone. Her breath came out slow, almost a whisper. 9. But even as the word left her lips, doubt clawed at her again. What if this wasn't enough? What if even 15 perfect kills couldn't erase the letters, the denials, the voices in those white-walled offices telling her she would never belong? The thought didn't linger long, because the insurgents were adapting, clumping together, covering each other's movements now. They weren't careless anymore. The battlefield had shifted again, and Laura realized something chilling. They weren't just fighting, they were stalling. She shifted her scope, scanning the perimeters, the shadowed corridors. And then she saw it, 3 of them, slipping east, away from the chaos, moving with purpose. Not fleeing, escaping. And with that realization came a weight she hadn't anticipated. If they escaped, this wouldn't just be an attack on fort. It would be the beginning of something larger, something calculated. Laura adjusted her grip on them, her pulse steady but her thoughts racing. For the first time since the shooting began, a sliver of fear cut through her calm. Not fear for herself, fear for what she couldn't yet see. Because behind the smoke, the gunfire, the kill counts, there was a question she couldn't shake. Why here, why today, why them? The answer, she knew, wasn't in her scope. It was still out there, moving, waiting. And with every breath she took, the shadow of it grew closer. How long could one person hold back an entire war? Laura's finger rested near the trigger, not on it. She learned the discipline of patience, the silence between shots. The tower vibrated faintly with distant explosions, each thud a reminder of the chaos unfolding below. Yet inside her scope, the world was reduced to centimeters, to angles, to fractions of breaths. "Foster, you're saving us out here," Colonel Davis's voice rasped through the radio. 7 remaining, hold steady. But his words felt thin against the weight pressing on her chest. Saving them for now. She had seen insurgents fight before, seen their tactics mutate mid-battle. If they were this prepared, this precise, this ruthless, then what she faced today was more than a raid. Her scope swept across the complex. Buildings she had walked through countless times were now broken shells, windows blackened with smoke, training fields scattered with wounded. The air itself felt heavy, as if the base were holding its breath. Then movement. 3 insurgents breaking from cover, spreading into a wedge formation. They weren't running blind. They were trained, disciplined, advancing with overlapping fire. Laura adjusted. First man, 1,156 meters. Partial cover, angled shoulder. Wind at 3 o'clock. She inhaled half a breath, squeezed. The man dropped, collapsing against the sandbags he thought had shielded him. The second surged forward, faster now, knowing he was exposed. 1,034 meters. Laura's mind raced through the timing. He'd clear into shadow in less than 3 seconds. The trigger broke clean. Another fall, momentum carrying him lifeless into the dirt. Her earpiece buzzed with sharp exclamations. Relief, awe, disbelief. But Laura didn't allow herself the luxury of feeling it. Because the third man, he moved differently. Not reckless, calculated. Low, controlled bursts of speed, his head swiveling as though he knew where the danger came from. Laura's gut tightened. Military, trained. Not just another fighter handed a rifle, this one had studied. Distance, 1,298 meters. Wind shift, slight cross current. He cut left, paused behind cover, then broke right, using the smoke like a veil. She tracked him, her breathing slowing even as her heart thudded harder. This is it. This is the one who tests me. He emerged, just a sliver, just a heartbeat. She fired. The recoil hammered her shoulder. 1.3 seconds stretched into eternity. Then contact. The body spun, dropped. She exhaled only then, shoulders sagging, a tremor threatening her calm. She had felt the edge of failure there, the whisper of what it meant to miss. Target 12 neutralized, she said into the radio, voice flat, professional. But inside, a storm surged. Because if these fighters were trained, really trained, then who had sent them? Her mind flashed back to the interviews, to the commanders in their sterile offices. We're not being discriminatory. We're being realistic. She had spent years convincing herself that their words were just walls. But what if these insurgents were proof that walls weren't the only danger? That somewhere beyond this base, an enemy had prepared an answer to every defense. Foster, Colonel Davis came again. 3 remaining, eastern perimeter. They're trying to break out. She swung the scope. The last 3 were running across open ground, not toward the fight but away. Escape. It was written in their stride, the way they risked exposure. Her throat went dry. If they got out, this wouldn't end here. She tracked the first, 1,145 meters, sprinting across dirt. She calculated the lead, the wind, the drag, squeezed. The man crumpled mid-stride, his body tumbling to a halt. 13, she whispered. The next moved with discipline, weaving, ducking low. 1,287 meters. He hugged shadows, timing his steps with bursts of smoke. She waited, patient, then fired. The crack, the weight, then the sudden stillness of a body in the dust. Her pulse was steady, but her eyes burned. Fatigue was creeping in at the edges, the kind no training ever taught you to fight, the fatigue of carrying the weight of dozens of lives on a single pair of shoulders. Only one remained. He was farthest, 1,356 meters. Light fatting, wind uncertain, distance brutal. She adjusted, recalculated, fought the fog creeping into her focus. This is the shot, she thought, the one they said you'd never make. Her chest rose, fell. She stilled her breath. For a moment everything, the alarms, the smoke, the doubt, fell silent. Trigger squeeze, recoil. 1.4 seconds later, the man fell. A lone figure, collapsing into dust as the sun dipped lower on the horizon. Silence. Then from the radio, all targets neutralized, threat eliminated. Laura leaned back from the scope, her cheeks sore from hours pressed to the stock. She rested her hand on the rifle, almost tenderly, as though it were an extension of her own body. Down below, the cheers began. Soldiers rising from cover, voices breaking into raw relief. They shouted her name, though most of them had never spoken to her before today. But Laura didn't smile. She didn't raise her fist in triumph. She sat in the tower, quiet, still, her eyes drifting across the battlefield she had just redrawn with 15 bullets. 15 shots, 15 hits, 0 misses. She had done the impossible. And yet, in the hollow of her chest, the question still lingered. What if it was never about proving them wrong? What if it was about what came after this? Because something in her gut told her the fight wasn't over. Not the gunfight, not the war, not the battle she'd been waging for years, the one not fought with rifles but with words typed in sterile rejection letters. She reached for the radio, her voice calm, clipped, the way it always was when the adrenaline drained. All targets down, area secure, requesting orders. But inside, beneath the stillness, her heart whispered what she could not say aloud. Now they'll have to listen. Why was the silence louder than the gunfire? The tower had stopped trembling. Smoke still rose in dark plumes across the base, and the acrid taste of cordite lingered in the back of Laura's throat. But the battlefield itself had quieted, emptied of the rhythm of combat. The last insurgent had fallen minutes ago. The last echo of they had rolled into silence. Laura sat back from the scope, shoulders locked, hands heavy. Her body screamed with exhaustion, though adrenaline still pulsed, demanding she stay alert. She flexed her fingers once, twice, staring at the rifle resting in front of her. For nearly an hour it had been her heartbeat. Now in the quiet it felt like a stranger. "Foster," the radio crackled, Colonel Davis's voice breaking through the static. "Report status." She pressed the transmitter. Her voice was calm, clipped. "All targets eliminated, 15 confirmed, no collateral damage." Silence followed. Not disbelief, not denial, but the weight of men struggling to process what they'd just heard. Then's gravel voice cut in. "Outstanding work, Sergeant." She lowered the radio. Her eyes swept the training complex below, where medics now moved freely, pulling the wounded from cover, carrying them toward the helicopter pad that only minutes earlier had been a killing zone. Rangers, Green Berets, foreign officers, all of them looked up toward the tower, their faces tilted skyward as if searching for the ghost who had pulled them out of death's grip. Laura stayed hidden in shadow. She didn't wave. She didn't want to be seen. Because what burned inside her wasn't pride. It was something heavier, something that didn't let her exhale fully. She thought of the men she hadn't reached in time, the ones who had already fallen in the opening minutes, 12 dead, 18 wounded. She saw their faces, though she hadn't been close enough to touch them. She saw their families, their empty bunks, their silent phones. Victory tasted of ash. The tower door creaked. Heavy boots climbed the metal stairs. Colonel Davis appeared first, his face a mask of discipline but his eyes betraying something raw, awe, disbelief, maybe even gratitude he didn't know how to voice. Sergeant Major followed, his jaw tight, his broad frame carrying the weight of what he'd witnessed through a spotting scope. "Foster," Davis said simply. His tone wasn't sharp like it had been that morning, nor perfunctory like an order. It was something else, something that edged toward respect. 15 for 15. I've never seen anything like it." She stood, her posture rigid, the held at her side. "Sir, I was doing my job. Our people were under attack. The weapon and the position made me the logical choice." Let out a low laugh, the kind that carried more disbelief than humor. Logical choice? That was beyond logic. 15 targets, extreme range, 0 misses. He shook his head. "I've seen Tier 1 operators miss shots easier than those." Laura's gaze didn't waver. "With respect, Sergeant Major, logic had nothing to do with it. It was necessity. There wasn't anyone else." The men exchanged a glance. Neither spoke the truth aloud, that her being anyone else was the only reason she'd been in that tower. Every qualified sniper was gone. Every man they would have chosen first was unavailable. She had been the last option, the reluctant gamble. And she had done what they would never have asked her to do if they'd had another choice. Davis exhaled, long and heavy. "The Pentagon will want a full report. Every shot recorded, every angle logged. What you did here will be studied for years." Laura lowered her eyes, a shadow passing over her face. Studied, like a specimen, like proof in a debate. She could already hear it, the men in conference rooms dissecting her angles, her breath, her kill count, reducing it all to data points. Not the fear in her chest, Not the silence she carried, just numbers. "Permission to secure the weapon, sir," she said flatly. Davis nodded. She moved to the rifle, checked the chamber and laid it into its case with deliberate care. The looked almost too large against her frame, but no one in the room could doubt now that she had mastered it in ways few ever had. When she straightened, Davis studied her. "You realize what this means, Foster?" Her jaw tightened. "It means our base is secure, sir." But he shook his head. "It means your name just rewrote the rule book." Stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They told you no. 3 times, I remember. Every instructor at Naval Special Warfare Command said women couldn't make the cut, but you just did what half of them couldn't." Laura's lips pressed into a line. The rejection letters played in her mind again. The sterile tone, the dismissal dressed up as science, physiological limitations, lack of resilience. But what gnawed at her wasn't their words. It was the knowledge that it had taken blood, fire, and bodies in the dirt for them to even consider they might be wrong. Her radio buzzed again, pulling her back. "Colonel Davis, secure comms link established with the Pentagon. They're requesting immediate debrief, and they want Sergeant Foster present." The room froze for a moment. Davis glanced at her. "Looks like you're about to have an audience, Sergeant." Laura said nothing. She gathered her gear, slung her pack, and followed them down the tower stairs. The walk across the base felt surreal. Soldiers parted around her. Some clapped her shoulder. Some just stared. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to bask in their awe. Every cheer sounded like static compared to the silence she still carried for the 12 who hadn't survived. By the time they reached the secure briefing room, the adrenaline had drained, leaving her body heavy, every step a drag through unseen mud. She settled into a chair, folding her hands on the table as a large monitor flickered to life. The Pentagon's seal glowed, then cleared to reveal a conference room packed with admirals and generals. In the center sat Admiral Richardson, the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. His voice was deep, deliberate. "Staff Sergeant Foster, I've reviewed the feed, 15 shots, 15 hits, confirmed kills at ranges exceeding our Tier 1 averages, no collateral damage." His eyes didn't leave hers even through the screen. "Do you understand what you've done?" Laura's throat tightened, but she spoke evenly. "I neutralized a threat, sir. Our personnel were at risk. I had the training and equipment to act." Richardson leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You've applied for SEAL training before?" "Yes, sir, 3 times." "And each time?" "Yes, sir." The room behind him shifted. Papers rustled. Men and women exchanged glances. Richardson's tone softened, though his eyes remained sharp. "Staff Sergeant Foster, today, you've done what many of our best would struggle to replicate. Your performance exceeds the standard of our most experienced operators. Against all policy, against all precedent, you've proven something we've never seen before." Laura's chest felt heavy, like the words were pressing down instead of lifting her, because she knew what came next. Richardson nodded once. "I am formally inviting you to Naval Special Warfare Command for immediate evaluation for SEAL training." The room went silent again. Laura's breath caught, though her face didn't show it. This was the invitation she had dreamed of, begged for, trained toward, and yet, in this moment, she felt no triumph. Only the quiet question of why it had taken so much blood to open a door that should have been judged on skill alone. Her voice was steady. "Sir, I accept." Richardson's expression softened just slightly. "Then prepare yourself, Sergeant. What comes next will be harder than anything you've faced." The screen went dark. The room fell silent. Laura lowered her gaze to the table, her hands still folded tight, her reflection faint in the polished wood. For the first time in years, the rejection letters in her mind were gone, burned away by fire and smoke and 15 perfect shots. But what replaced them wasn't peace. It was the weight of knowing she had stepped onto a path that would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. And somewhere deep inside, another question whispered, pulling her back into the silence. What if proving yourself is the easy part? Why did it feel like every eye was waiting for her to fail? The Pacific air was salt-heavy, biting against her face as Laura stood on the sand. A gray dawn stretched over the horizon, the waves slamming into shore like a drumbeat. Around her, candidates in fatigues shifted on their feet, some muttering under their breath, some silent. Most of them avoided looking at her, but she felt the weight of their thoughts anyway. She doesn't belong here. This isn't her place. She won't last a week. She'd heard it all before, in whispers and blunt refusals. This was different only because they no longer had the authority to deny her. They had given her entry but not acceptance. That she would have to carve out stroke by stroke, mile by mile, hour by hour. Candidates hit the surf. The instructor's voice cracked through the morning air like lightning. The group rushed forward, bodies plunging into the freezing waves. Salt water closed over Laura's head, searing her lungs, icing her skin. She kicked back to the surface, gasping, then fell into rhythm beside the others. But she knew this wasn't about strength. Not yet. This was about breaking rhythm, breaking will. SEAL training was designed to separate those who merely wanted it from those who needed it like oxygen. The instructors didn't need to make the water colder, the sand harsher, the hours longer. Nature did that. Their job was simply to lean close and whisper doubt into ears that were already screaming for relief. Laura had spent years carrying those whispers. She built armor against them. But armor cracked when repeated blows fell in the same place. And here, every blow landed in the same place. You don't belong. By the second week, exhaustion had worn into her bones like rust. Every muscle screamed. Every joint throbbed. She woke to the sound of instructors banging trash can lids, her body already aching before the first step hit the sand. And still she pushed. Because somewhere inside her, sharper than pain, sharper than fatigue, was the memory of fort, the smell of smoke, the weight of the lives she had saved with 15 perfect squeezes. She carried that memory not as a medal but as a question. If I could do that, why should I not be here? The instructors didn't care about fort. They didn't care about records or reputation. All they cared about was now. Could she carry the log? Could she run the miles? Could she stay awake when sleep was a weapon? One night during a surf torture session, Laura lay on her back in the water, linked arm to arm with candidates on either side. The waves crashed over them, drenching, suffocating. Instructors stalked the line with bullhorns, their voices sharp knives. Quit now, save yourself, ring the bell. The bell stood on the sand, golden, gleaming even in the darkness. To some it looked like salvation. To Laura it looked like a coffin. The candidate to her right shivered violently, teeth chattering. He let out a sob, broke the chain, and stumbled to shore. The bell rang, its echo slicing through the night. Laura clenched her jaw. She would not move. She would not listen. The cold seeped deeper, her body trembling. Her mind clawed for escape. She thought of her rejections, the sterile lines. Female candidates do not meet the physical requirements. She thought of every man who had smirked, every superior who had shrugged. She let their voices swirl with the waves crashing against her, and then she drowned them with her own silence. She stayed. Morning came, and with it another run, then another, then a pool drill where instructors tied knots around her legs and arms and dropped her into deep water. Panic clawed at her chest as she sank, lungs burning. She closed her eyes, willed herself into stillness. Slow movements, untie the knots. Don't thrash, don't waste oxygen. The surface broke above her, sunlight warping through water. Her chest begged for air. Fingers numb, she pulled the last knot free and kicked upward. When she broke the surface, gasping, the instructor's expressions were unreadable. Again. She went under. Days blurred, hunger gnawed, bruises bloomed, but her silence never broke. Some nights, lying on her cot, she let the doubt slip in. What if they were right all along? What if the body did fail, if not today, then tomorrow or the next? What if her 15 shots had been an anomaly, a miracle born of desperation? But then she would remember the look on the Rangers' faces when the gunfire stopped, the voices on the radio, broken with relief, the sound of Colonel Davis saying, "You just rewrote the rule book." And she knew miracles didn't come 15 times in a row. By the third month, her body had adapted in strange ways. Pain became a background hum, exhaustion a constant companion. What mattered wasn't the absence of suffering, but the choice to keep moving through it. And slowly the eyes on her began to change. The mutters softened. The looks shifted from skepticism to something else. Wariness, maybe even respect. One evening, as they hauled boats across the beach, a candidate beside her staggered. His knees buckled. The others shouted at him, but Laura moved without thinking, wedging her shoulder under the boat to take his share. Her body screamed. Her spine threatened to snap, but she didn't falter. The man gasped beside her, Why'd you do that?" She didn't answer, because the truth wasn't noble. It wasn't about him. It was about the same silence she had carried since Fort, the silence that refused to let her quit, that refused to let anyone say again that she didn't belong. And in that silence, mile after mile, drill after drill, she built something stronger than acceptance. She built inevitability. By the time Hell Week came, her name was no longer whispered with doubt. It was spoken with something else, something heavier. Foster doesn't break. But Laura knew better. Everyone broke. The trick wasn't avoiding the break. It was carrying the pieces forward anyway. As the week dragged into nights without sleep, as her skin tore and bled, as her body wasted under relentless demands, she held onto the memory of the tower. The 15 shots, and she thought not of triumph, not of glory, but of the faces of those she couldn't save. It was grief, not pride, that kept her moving. And when dawn finally broke at the end of Hell Week, and the instructors blew the whistle, and candidates collapsed into the sand around her, Laura remained upright. She stood, swaying, every bone screaming but her eyes steady on the horizon. Because she had carried silence this far, and she would carry it farther still. Why did the finish line feel heavier than the starting line? By the final phase of training, Laura's body had become something unrecognizable to her. Scar tissue where blisters had torn open and healed over, a knee that clicked every time she stood, a shoulder that ground like stone. Sleep deprivation had carved hollows beneath her eyes, and every nerve felt like it had been wired to fire pain at random. And yet through the fog, through the wear and tear, she moved, one evolution at a time, one drill at a time. The instructors had stopped calling her Foster like a number. Now they used her name with the same clipped precision they used for every other candidate. That small shift meant more to her than applause ever could. But the weight never lifted. If anything, it grew heavier, because the closer she came to the trident, the sharper her questions became. What does it mean to wear it? Who decides if you're worthy? And if you earn it after they swore you never could, does it change the trident, or does it change you? The days blurred into a gauntlet of exhaustion. Land navigation exercises through endless brush, timed swims where water became both enemy and mirror, demolition drills with instructors barking corrections in her ear. Every failure meant punishment. Every punishment meant more pain stacked onto bodies already breaking. And still she stayed silent. Some nights lying on the cot, she would feel the ache pulsing in her chest and think of Fort. She remembered the tower, the rifle's recoil, the ringing silence afterward. She had saved lives that day, and in doing so, shattered the belief that had defined her career. Women cannot. But now here, surrounded by men who had bled beside her, who had carried logs until their skin tore, who had swum until their lungs burned, the battle wasn't about proving women could. It was about proving she belonged, not as an exception, but as one of them. During one of the final endurance tests, a forced march with rucksacks heavy enough to bend spines, the instructors pushed them through flooded terrain. Mud sucked at their boots, water climbed to their waists, and cold gnawed through every layer. Candidates stumbled. Some dropped. Laura kept moving, legs like stone pillars grinding forward. One candidate ahead of her collapsed, face first into the muck. For a split second, the instructors watched. This was the test. Would the line keep moving? Would one more man be left behind? Laura bent down, gripped his harness, and heaved. Her back screamed, her legs buckled, but she dragged him upright, pushed him forward until his feet found rhythm again. The instructor's eyes flickered, but no praise came. There never was. Still, something unspoken passed down the line. A respect not voiced, but carried in the way men shifted slightly to make room for her shoulder against the weight of the log, the boat, the miles. Respect earned not by perfection, but by endurance. Weeks later, when the training finally neared its end, the candidates stood in formation on the parade deck. Their uniforms were sharp, their boots shined, but their bodies bore the scars of everything they'd endured. Laura's heart pounded in her chest as the senior instructor stepped forward. In his hand, a small golden pin glinted under the California sun, the seal trident. Her mind flashed back to the rejection letters. Female candidates do not meet the physical requirements. The sterile office. Commander Hayes's polite dismissal. The quiet ache of doors slammed shut. And now, standing in line, shoulder to shoulder with the men who had suffered as she had, she felt something heavier than triumph. Her name was called. Laura stepped forward, boots clicking against the deck. She stood at attention, eyes fixed straight ahead. The instructor pinned the trident to her chest. The metal was cold against her uniform. "You've earned this," he said, his voice low, almost human. She saluted, pivoted, returned to formation. The ceremony blurred around her. Applause, handshakes, the murmurs of families and commanders. But Laura stood rooted, the weight of the pin pressing against her chest like a brand. She had wanted this for so long. She had dreamed of it through rejection after rejection. She had bled, suffered, and fought to be here. And now, with the gold trident resting over her heart, she realized the truth. It didn't erase the pain of being told no. It didn't undo the years she had been dismissed. It didn't make her a symbol or an exception or a miracle. It made her a seal, nothing more, nothing less. That night, alone in the barracks, Laura took the pin off her chest and laid it on the table. She stared at it for a long time, the silence stretching around her. Was this vindication, redemption, or simply another beginning? Her phone buzzed, a message from Colonel Davis. "Deployment orders incoming. You won't have long to rest." Laura closed her eyes. She felt the exhaustion still thrumming in her veins, the weight of everything behind her, the uncertainty of everything ahead. The trident gleamed under the dim light. And she thought not with triumph, but with quiet resolve. This isn't the end of the fight. This is where it truly begins. Why did stepping onto foreign soil feel heavier than the weight of the trident itself? The aircraft's interior thrummed with the low roar of engines. Laura sat strapped in, the vibration rattling up through her boots, the scent of fuel and steel sharp in her nose. Around her, the team checked gear in practice silence, night vision goggles, rifles, comms, the ritual before deployment. Her fingers brushed the golden pin beneath her uniform. The trident. She had earned it, but tonight it felt less like armor and more like a question pressed against her chest. This was her first mission as part of SEAL Team 2. No more training grounds, no more proving in simulations or sterile evaluations. This was real. The objective was simple on paper. Intercept a high-value target moving through a rural compound in Eastern Europe, a man funneling weapons into insurgent networks. Capture if possible, eliminate if necessary. But paper didn't carry weight, reality did. Laura could feel the glances in the dim cabin, the unspoken doubts. Some of the men had been here before, countless missions, countless kills. For them, this was routine. For her, it was the moment they'd been waiting for, the one where they'd measure her not by her training scores or her rifle record, but by what happened when boots hit dirt. The team leader, Lieutenant Carver, finally spoke. "We've got 1 hour to insertion. Review your sectors, your contingencies. This is a clean op, in, out, no noise." His eyes swept the group, paused for the briefest moment on Laura, then moved on. No words, no acknowledgement, just silence. It was the same silence she'd felt since arriving at the unit. They didn't haze her, didn't insult her. They didn't have to. Their doubt hung heavier than any insult could. The aircraft banked. Laura closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the red glow of cabin lights. She pictured Fort, the tower, this recoil, the impossible string of 15 shots. She reminded herself, "You've been here before. Not here, but here. Alone, the last line, you didn't break then. You won't break now." The green light snapped on. 2 minutes. The team rose as one, packs slung, weapons checked one last time. Laura moved with them, each step steady despite the storm in her chest. Then the ramp lowered, night air rushing in, bitter and sharp. The ground below stretched like a shadowed map, forests and fields under a sliver of moonlight. They dropped into the dark. The landing was clean. The team fanned out, boots whispering over grass. Laura fell into position, scanning sectors, rifle ready. Her night vision cut the world into green outlines. The compound lay ahead, faint lights flickering from shuttered windows. Somewhere inside, their target moved, surrounded by guards armed and disciplined. The approach was slow, methodical, each step rehearsed in silence, but Laura's mind wasn't quiet. Will they follow my word if I see something? Will they trust my eyes, or will hesitation cost us? They reached the perimeter wall. Carver raised his hand, signaling halt. The team stacked, preparing to breach. Laura's eyes swept the rooftops, her scope narrowing. A shadow moved, a sentry adjusting position, weapon glinting faintly. He had angle on the stack, perfect to shred them the second they breached. Her pulse spiked. She keyed her mic, voice low, steady. "Rooftop, 1 o'clock, armed sentry, he's watching the entry." Silence. Then Carver's voice curt, "You sure?" "Yes." Another pause, heavier. She felt it, the weight of doubt, the hesitation. "Take him." Laura exhaled, aligned her crosshairs, and squeezed. The suppressed crack barely registered, but the shadow crumpled, sliding silently out of sight. No time for relief. The breach went, shattered the compound's quiet. Shouts erupted, gunfire following. The team surged forward. Laura moved with them, clearing corners, her rifle steady. Every movement drilled 1,000 times in training, but sharper now, alive with consequence. She caught a fighter in the hallway, weapon raised, mouth open in a shout. 2 rounds center mass. He dropped. The team pressed deeper. Every room was chaos, shouting, splintering wood, gunfire, strobing light. Then the call came, target moving, east wing. Laura's blood surged. The mission's center of gravity was slipping away. She broke off with 2 others, sprinting down a narrow hall, boots pounding. At the far end, a door slammed. She kicked it open, weapon raised. Inside, the high-value target scrambled toward another exit, guards firing blind behind him. Laura dropped low, squeezed, 2 guards collapsing before they could adjust. She moved without thought, her rifle tracking like an extension of her eyes. The target froze, cornered. His eyes flicked from her to the other SEALs pouring in. He raised his hand slowly. "Target secured," she called, voice sharp, controlled. The room settled into silence, only the rasp of heavy breathing filling it. Carver entered last, his face unreadable. He looked from the captured man to Laura, then gave a curt nod. The extraction was clean. No casualties, no missteps. Back on the aircraft, the team strapped in, the target bound and silent between guards. Laura sat with her rifle across her lap, her body humming with the aftershocks of adrenaline. No one said a word at first, just the thrum of engines. Then one of the men across from her spoke, "Good eyes on that rooftop." Another muttered, "Could lost the stack." Laura didn't answer. She only nodded slightly, her gaze dropping to the rifle. For the first time since she joined them, the silence around her felt different. Not hostile, not dismissive. Heavier still, but shifted like stone giving way just slightly under relentless pressure. Carver leaned forward, his voice low for her alone. "Not bad, Foster, not bad at all." It wasn't praise, not exactly, but it was something. She looked out the aircraft window, the night sky stretching endless. The trident still pressed cold against her chest. She had fought for this, bled for it, been dismissed and doubted, and tonight, for the first time, she wasn't the exception. She was part of the team. But even as the plane carried them home, even as the weight on her chest shifted into something like belonging, she knew the truth. Respect wasn't given, it wasn't even earned once. It had to be defended, again and again, with every mission, every moment, every breath. And that fight, the one she carried in silence, was only just beginning. What do you carry when the noise fades? Weeks after the mission, Laura found herself standing alone on a shoreline. The Pacific stretched endless in front of her, its waves rolling steady, indifferent. She had returned from her first deployment alive, her team intact, the target secured. On paper, it was success. But paper couldn't measure what lived inside her. She stared at the horizon, the surf tugging at her boots, and thought of the path behind her. The rejection letters still folded in her locker, their ink now brittle with time. The tower at Fort where 15 shots had changed everything. The grueling months in, the nights where the bell had whispered to her, the mornings when her body had screamed to quit. And now, the compound overseas, the rooftop sentry who had nearly undone them, the moment her call had saved the stack. 15 shots, one trident, and still silence pressed against her. Behind her, voices carried faintly from the barracks. Her team, her brothers now, though they would never call her sister. The shift was there, quiet but real. They no longer doubted her eyes, her trigger, her place. She had carried her weight, and more than once she had carried theirs. Yet Laura knew respect wasn't a medal you pinned once. It was a currency you earned every day and spent just as quickly. One mistake, one hesitation, and it vanished. For her, the margin for error would always be thinner. And she had accepted that. Because she had never wanted to be the exception. She wanted to be the proof. Her phone buzzed. A message from Admiral Richardson. Further assignments pending, stand by. Laura closed the phone, slipped it into her pocket, and let her eyes wander back to the horizon. She thought of the girls still in uniform, still reading rejection letters that sounded like hers once had. She thought of the men in pressed uniforms who still sat in conference rooms, debating numbers, physiology, realistic limitations. And she thought of the 12 who hadn't made it through Fort that morning. The trident glinted faintly against her chest, heavy, not with gold but with memory. She knelt in the sand, scooped a handful, and let it spill slowly through her fingers. Grains catching sunlight, slipping away one by one. She whispered to herself, almost without sound, "This isn't mine alone." Because she knew the truth now. Her 15 shots hadn't been about her. They had been about the lives saved, the walls broken, the silence shattered. And every mission since was another stone laid on that foundation. The fight wasn't against insurgents alone. It was against walls, against silence, against the small, invisible cages built out of assumptions and prejudice. And that fight would never end. Laura stood, the waves foaming at her boots, the sky burning orange with evening light. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the water's surface, distorted but steady. Behind her, footsteps approached. One of her teammates, Carver, he didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, staring at the same horizon. "Not a bad first op," he said finally. His voice was dry, almost casual, but it carried something heavier beneath it. Laura gave a small nod. Not bad. Carver's eyes shifted toward her, then back to the sea. You know, some of us didn't think you last. I know. But you did. More than that, you belong here. The words hung between them. Not praise, not absolution, but something real. Laura let the silence stretch, the waves filling it. Finally, she said softly, belonging isn't the point. Doing the job is. Carver gave a slight smile. Fair enough. He turned, heading back toward the barracks, leaving her alone again with the surf. Laura stayed. The horizon stretched endless. The trident pressed cold against her chest, and she thought of what Admiral Richardson had said, that what came next would be harder than anything she'd faced. She believed him. But harder didn't scare her. Harder was where she had lived all along. The sun dipped lower, the sky bleeding into fire. Laura closed her eyes, inhaled the salt air, and let the silence settle inside her once more. Because silence had been her burden, and now it was her strength. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.